Hello and welcome to the Whisky Dan radio show, where we, over here, we like to review spirits, beer, and other alcoholic beverages, and then have social commentary after I've had a few. So thank you for joining us, whether you're listening in the morning, afternoon, or evening. We're recording right now at around 9:30 on May 23rd, 2019. Glad to have you along. Tonight I am drinking Giant Texas Bourbon Whiskey. It's pretty good. It's about $20 for a fifth of it. It's really sweet. It's I guess I don't know why they call it Giant Texas. I mean, it's not like a massive bottle. It's just it's like their own take on the Jack Daniel's style bottle, just a square bottle. It's bottled out of Houston. It's super sweet. It's really sweet bourbon. You know, like occasionally you'll get I don't know, like to me Jack Daniel's just doesn't taste as good. I'm going off of that one because that's what a lot of people know. However, it's just it's not my favorite Jack Daniel's, it is. But Giant Texas, like, man, for $20 you're getting a really good whiskey. It's kind of hard to beat it. So if you're in the mood for trying some new bourbon, or you're just now getting into bourbon, I would suggest this is a great starting point for you. It doesn't give you that like really bad heartburn that like a lot of whiskeys do, like Evan Williams or something like that. And I've drank a lot of it, and I've never really like woke up feeling like absolutely trash, because certain liquors, and granted everyone's different, but certain liquors are just gonna make it feel like crap. For me, that's Old Crow, even though I like it, but we'll talk about that in a different episode. But for today, with the Giant Texas, like I said, 22, I think it was like 22 with the tax. Yeah, about $22. Can't really go wrong with it. I don't know how many places carry it. I picked up mine in Troop, Texas. If you're in the East Texas area, that would definitely be a place to go. So for tonight's episode, I want to dive into something kind of near and dear to my heart, as I was once a waiter. Believe that. I wasn't very good. I was pretty crappy as a waiter, because my customer service skills are not the best. But this is more of like a love letter to those who are working in it, and for the people that are working as a waiter or waitress. And if you're listening, just so you know, there are people out there. There are patrons of restaurants out there that really do care about the job that you do, and we do want to tip well. However, tonight I'm not going to talk about the good people that are there. I'm going to talk about the bad people and the shitty experiences that I had while working as a waiter. So one of the first jobs I ever had, I was working as a waiter at it was a country club, and I worked there for maybe 2-3 weeks. It was right before I graduated high school, when someone was like, "Hey, you can come work up here." So I got the job, but I didn't like it. The business was too irregular. I don't know. I wasn't good at it, and I never really thought about it again. And then years later, I was in college, and I was working at Hobby Lobby, and I got laid off because I was working as just like the temp guy for the Christmas season. And like early January, probably like around, I want to say like the 5th of January or some crap like that, I got laid off, which I wasn't mad at all. I hated that job, but I got laid off. And an old boss that I had from back when I worked at a Jimmy John's, but that boss that I had from over there, he had got management position over at a place called Studio Movie Grill. And if you're not familiar with Studio Movie Grill, it's a dine-in theater, and let me tell you, it's not worth going to. Because for me, if I'm going to go to a theater, I'm there to watch a movie. I don't want to be distracted by the food that I'm eating to get involved in the story that I'm watching. Or, vice versa, I don't want to be enjoying the food so much where I'm like, I got to pay attention to this movie, and then I don't want people walking in front of me, and it's loud. It's not the best watching experience if you're like a big time moviegoer. It's just not a good idea. So just save your money. Don't bother going. It's not really worth it. If you're going out for like a dinner and a movie, go to a dinner and then to a movie. Don't try to combine the two, because you're just taking the worst parts of both aspects. I don't know. Like I'm not even like a big movie going kind of person, but if you are, that's great. But okay, first of all, the tickets are overpriced for what they are. Like, you get a nice leather seat, but a lot of theaters now do the leather seat thing for like the regular price, like $8-10. I think their movies are like 12 at the primetime showings. And the food there is garbage. It's just shitty food. It's all microwaved and it sucks. It's like Applebee's dine-in theater. Why would you even go to that? That sounds like you're going to get diarrhea afterwards. And I did a lot because I ate there because the food was free. But, well, we stole the food. Anyway, point is, okay, I got this job there, right? And it was working as it was called a server position. So you weren't like technically a waiter, but you wore like the black pants and the white shirt and had a name tag on it, little magnetic name tag. And I got that job, and I had the worst sales out of the entire waitstaff team. And it was great. I loved it. I loved the fact that I had the worst sales because I hated the job. And it wasn't like a normal restaurant where, like, a lot of times, like, the waiter or waitress kind of like, all right, so what can I get you? And then they write it down on a little notepad, and they go, like, type it on a computer, then the computer prints out a receipt. No. They did this where you had, like, it was an iPod Touch, and they were all linked to this central server, right? And that server went into, like, then from the server it goes to the kitchen, and the kitchen printed out the receipt. But the problem was that it was all wireless. It's sometimes, like, the internal Wi-Fi, like the intranet for the deal, like for the whole movie theater, it would just go down, and then you couldn't use the handheld. So, or it would just run super slow, or they were constantly dying, like the battery was dead on them, or they were just, it just was shit. So what I did is, because there were computers in the hall, and I would just write down what the people wanted in which seat and just go back outside of the theater and then just punch it in that way, because it was much faster, had way less issues with that. I hated that aspect of it because it was like, hey, we're going to take an already kind of difficult job because you're going to be walking up and down steps when it's dark during a theater and trying to take people's orders. And then we're going to give you a device to take the orders, which works maybe 60% of the time. So it made the job just artificially difficult. And so that right there made me just like, you know what? I don't even give a shit. Like, fuck this place. I don't even care. So anyway, like, so I was bad at getting the orders in on time because I would run outside to go put the orders in because the system didn't work, and I didn't even like having one with me anyway. And then the management would be like, hey, we need you to upsell, try to like get them, like if they're getting, always ask them what kind of drink that they want. If they want a water, see if they want a bottled water, because that's like $4 when the tap water is free. I think I had just too much integrity for that kind of job because, like, I knew when families couldn't spend, like, I could kind of get the vibe that they didn't really have a whole lot of money to spend, and they were spending a bunch of money to take, like, the 2 parents and, like, the 3 kids out. Like, that's a lot of money. That's 5 people. That's 5 tickets and 5 meals and stuff. Like, you're going to drop it, like, $120, like, just in this one thing. And if I felt that I dropped $120 just to do that one thing, I would leave as a dissatisfied customer. So I would try to make it as easy for these people as I could, and I would offer them, like, hey, if you order this, it's a little bit cheaper, and say that, so my sales would be really far down. Like, I would, like, hey, just get water or whatever. Like, oh, like, because they didn't want us to tell the customers how much some of the stuff was if they didn't ask. Like, oh, like, how much is it for a Pepsi? And be like, well, really, it was like $4. But I was just like, well, like, and yours were just like, you just say, oh, large Pepsi, like. Ideally, the customer would never have to ask how much anything cost. But I was a lot more upfront with how expensive a lot of the things were at that place. Just artificial. It was just overpriced. It was overpriced and shitty. And I saw that model. I didn't even like what I was doing. And then coupled with that, in the fact that the system barely worked, it made it to where I just wanted to be a crappy employee because I wanted to see the company of Studio Movie Girl just fall apart. And I know that that's like ridiculous to think about for like, oh, what's one worker going to be able to do for something like that? But like in my core, I wanted to like put a chink in that armor. But anyway, at any rate, eventually my sales were so bad that I got bumped to working runner, which is which is half of the server's job, because the server just took the order, and the runner was the person that just ran the food or drinks to the customers. And if on like super busy days like Friday and Saturdays, it'd be drink runners and food runners, and you always wanted to be a drink runner because you're in and out. It's way quicker. It's a lot less weight to carry. Like, because like, granted, drinks can weigh a lot, but you can only carry. They had a caddy, but you can only hold 8 in each caddy. But whereas like for a food run, you had this massive like plate that the at restaurants that they have like for all this food, and they would like overload that thing to get it into the theater to pass it out. It sucked. I hated that. But I was a lot better at that. Problem was I was 20 at the time. Yeah, I was about 20, and no, I was 19. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was like 19 at the time. But I was working with like a lot of high school kids, and like 16-year-old high school kids. And granted, it's only a 3-year difference at that time, but there's a big mental gap there. But that's most of the runners and stuff, which is whatever. But oh well. I mean, granted, everybody needs a job, but yeah, it sucked for me because I just didn't want to deal with them because they would talk about really superfluous things, and I'm like trying to think about college or this, that, and the other, or having to pay your rent, and that's nothing that they had to deal with. So it was hard for me to make friends that way. And it was hard for me to make friends with the servers because a lot of the servers, they weren't from the area. They were college students like myself, but they weren't from East Texas. They were from like Dallas or Houston or Fayetteville or something like that, and they didn't really give a shit about me. Maybe it was because like I was poor, and a lot of them were like daddy money rich, and it was super annoying. And also, they all did like drugs. I'm not talking about just like weed, but we're talking like a lot of white girl, maybe some Molly. I wasn't really about that, so I didn't really hang out and make a lot of friends with those people. But the people that I did make friends with, not the runners, but it was the turn team, and the turn team was. Oh boy, it was something else. The turn team was the crew of people that cleans up the theaters after the movies, gets them ready for the next showing. And as you could see, and this is where they stuck like all the rejects, which is probably where I belonged, to be honest, because we were definitely the dankest of the group. Now, granted, a lot of people on turn teams were high at their job. I didn't do that because it's not really my style. But yeah, turn team was something else. Turn team was something else because just like the people on it, they didn't fit in any of the categories because one, they weren't really high school kids, and two, they weren't like the preppy server kind of group. And then also you would stay till like 2 in the morning sometimes, which was just awful. Which was just, oh god, it was absolutely awful. And to think, okay, so a lot of times, like, your work day would start at 5 p.m. and you'd get off at, like, 1 o'clock in the morning, which is disgusting, or, like, midnight. So you're working, like, a 7-8 hour shift, but it's at, like, the times where, like, your body is, like, trying to, like, not be awake and moving and doing all this crap. So it was just absolute just dog shit hours. Just dog shit job, and the pay wasn't that great either. And this is where the tipping comes into factor, because the way that the job was worked for servers, like when I was working a server, they did tip share for like the whole theater, and it sucked because like there would be certain theaters that didn't tip like jack fucking shit, but that was the theater that you were assigned to, and they would always have like the rudest customers and stuff like that who just weren't going to tip no matter what, or like, oh, the kitchen got backed up, so then they take it out on you, and that's completely out of control. Like, all you're doing is taking orders and trying to help get food out there, because while the runners ran like most of the food, the servers would help if they got behind. So really, in a lot of fairness, the servers did deserve a lot of the tips that they made. However, the runners were also part of that tip share. Like, they got like a percentage plus their hourly wage of like all the tips. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because they were just taking all this money, and let's say like 10% went to the servers, and they took that other 90%, or I'm sorry, 10% went to the runners, and they took that other 90%, and they just divided it up against all of the servers that were working that shift, which is a really crappy way to doing it, because like there were some, like, granted, like, I say that I sucked at the job, but, like, I feel that I pulled my weight, but I feel there were a lot of people up there who just didn't pull their weight at all, and then they made a boatload of money, or not a boatload, but they made far more than what they had earned. Whereas there's guys like myself and a few others that just that pulled their weight, but were making much less than what they were earning, because there were other people that were weighing it down. But that was the only fair way to do it, because when you're seating, 400 people an hour, how else are you going to try to, oh, well, this person tipped you this and this person tipped you that, and there's the inherent problem with it. But that doesn't take the customer off the hook necessarily in this situation, because if we had a theater that didn't tip, it would have really, really substantially dropped the amount of tips that you were going to get out of that evening. And it sucked, because like some nights you would walk out like $120, and some nights you'd walk out 40, and you feel like you worked just as hard on those two shifts. So that being said, people need to tip what they owe. It's not about how good the service was, or how good the food was, or how good, this, that, and the other was, the atmosphere, the setting, how courteous. Granted, as a waiter or waitress, it's your job to be courteous and respectful and attentive towards the customer. I would argue that 95% of all wait staff is that. And then I think that a lot of people that are customers at these restaurants that are super demanding, of what they want on their plate and how they want it delivered and all this stuff, those people are called assholes. And if you're going to be that kind of a dick to someone who's working for like $2.13 an hour plus tips, and they're probably trying to like get their way through school or pay for their kids or something like that, because people that are working as a waiter, waitress, they're not, in it because they love the job. They're in it because it makes decent money and it's flexible hours, which means you get a lot of college kids, you get a lot of single parents, you get a lot of young couples, younger people that are working those jobs to try to make ends meet, and then you get customers that come in there and they treat them like absolute horseshit. They just treat people like horseshit, because it's like, oh, my tortillas are cold. I'm not gonna give you the $4 that I owe you for bringing all this shit to me. Fuck you. If that's your mentality, you can go fuck yourself. There's no reason for you just to like, I'm gonna tip him $0. Like, it's not like tipping somebody $0 is that's like saying I didn't even have a waiter. Like, if you never got your drink refilled, if you didn't even get, if you barely got your order taken or something like that, I can understand tipping $0, or if they were rude to you or insulted you. But if they're just like, your food came out late, like all the plates didn't come in at the same time, something like that. That has nothing to do with the waiter or the waitress. That has to do with the kitchen behind it. They could have had a dishwasher walk out. They could be short-staffed. Somebody could have not shown up today. There's so many factors at play, and then people want to just translate that straight over into just not tipping. That's not fair at all. To bring another example to mind, like earlier I had mentioned how I had a job at Jimmy John's. Now, I worked at the same Jimmy John's 2 different times. One for about 6 months and the other one for about 5. And there was about a 2-year gap between it, I believe. But anyway, the first time I did it, I was a delivery driver. And I was paid $7 an hour plus tips in the amount of $1, and $1 tips, and the amount of times I was stiffed was probably made up for about 35% to 40% of all deliveries, just because people didn't tip for cold sandwiches, which is fucking horseshit. Like, you're paying for a service to get it brought to your house. You should throw that man $3-4. Like, a $3 tip would have been perfect. $5 tips were amazing. I love doing $5 tips because you could do 6 deliveries and make $30. And that would have made the night worth it. Because, like, you think about it, you're driving your own personal vehicle. So you're putting all this extra mileage and, tear on your vehicle. So that way, so think about it. Because with every mile you drive, you're expending oil, tires, gas, all of that kind of stuff. And $7 an hour is not going to be able to cover that. So really being a delivery driver, it's not a sustainable job at all. Don't. If there's any advice I can give to someone who's trying to get a first job, don't be a delivery driver. It's not worth it. You won't make enough to counteract the long-term effects of the car, because you're going to put on another 80 to 90 miles on your vehicle, depending on how big the range is and how often you work, like how long your shifts are. You're going to put on like that like a day. You're going to be putting on like 80, 90 miles on your vehicle a day. It's not worth it. It's not worth $7 an hour plus tips, where you get a paycheck, at the end of 2 weeks for $315 plus, your, $200 worth of tips. It's not worth it. It's simply not worth it. I want you to have from that is, if you're sitting at your house and you're with friends or whatever, and you're like, hey, we're going to order Domino's, we're going to order Jimmy John, we're going to order delivery, at least $5. At least tip them $5. If you don't want to pay for the tip, drive up there yourself. If you're like completely hammered, it doesn't matter. What's $5 when you're drunk? So, but yeah, and then tipping at bars. Tipping at bars for me is a little different. When I'm drinking at a bar, which is about once a week, when I'm drinking at a bar, I usually tip $1 for every drink I order, which I think is fair, because typically I'll drink on like an open mic night or something like that, where they have some kind of drink special, right? And then I'll get, 3 or 4 beers, and you get $4 out of me, and then you get, but there's, 60 people there. You get $4 out of 60 people each. That's a lot of money in one night. Now, I do have a friend who's a bartender, and she, I tip her a little bit higher. I think it's like $2 a drink, just because I know her outside of work, and I know that the bar that she works at is a fucking dive, and I love it. I go there like all the time. But she has to deal with a lot of shit. Like, too much shit for a job that's not, I wouldn't want to work it. Let's put it that way. Like, everything's like, oh, it'd be cool to be a bartender. No, it's not. Do you want to deal with drunk assholes who are going to get probably, like, either really racist or misogynistic, like, in public? Like, okay, it's one thing to be racist in your own home, because everyone's a little racist in their own home. And if they say they're not, they're fucking lying to you. Slap them. Public, just rip snorting drunk, and you're just yelling about, brown people. I wouldn't ever advise that, ever. It's not a good idea. It does not end well. However, yeah, I wouldn't want to deal with that kind of people, and I wouldn't want to have that kind of job. Like, I was bad at being a waiter, and those people were sober. You imagine if it was involved with alcohol, and then there's always, like, one kind of asshole who's probably trying to pick a fight, and you got to break that up. Like, no, it's no amount of tips are worth that. I couldn't do it. So, think about that next time you go out for a drink. Be sure to tip the bartender fairly, and think about, the way that it is with waiters and waitresses, like what kind of shitty day they gotta go with, and whatever all the stuff that they got going on behind them, and how, like, the dishwasher might be a dick to them, or the so and so's out of whack, whatever. Like, there's a lot of factors at play here, and not giving them their $5, $6, $7 that they deserve, for waiting on your table. It's pretty shitty on you, man. It's really shitty on you. So just always keep in mind, you got to look at people in 3 dimensions here. They're not just bringing you your taco platter. They got a whole lot of other shit going on right there. And you tipping them $7, $8, you're like, hey, that guy's a cool guy. He gave me a good tip today. So keep that in mind next time you go out to eat. And hopefully, you don't feel like how I did when I worked those kind of jobs. And if you are working one of those kind of jobs, don't give them a reason to not give you a good tip. Always do the job to the best of your ability. So that way that the ball was in their court. They didn't tip you. If you did everything that you could and then they don't tip you, well, then they're just dick. And sorry, but some people in this world are going to be shitty. But hopefully enough people listening to this and think about people in 3 dimensions, that there's a lot more going on than just what's right in front of them. You might just wind up living in a better place. So just be sure to tip. It's not even that hard. And honestly, it's like a crowdfunding kind of thing. Like, if everybody pitches in $3, then this person will have enough to eat for the next month. And that's kind of really how it works. So just keep that in mind. As I said at the very beginning of this show, tonight I have been, and will continue to do so after the recording of this show. I have been drinking Texas bourbon whiskey. Like I said, about $20 for a fifth of it. Really sweet. I didn't mention this before, but it's got like a real good like maple kind of like aroma to it. So as you bring the glass up to your mouth, you kind of like just breathe in all the whiskey smell. Oh man, it's like a really good maple. I don't even know how they put it. I really ought to be a little bit more prepared when I talk about these whiskeys, because it's like all the ingredients and like the distillery process. I really don't know that. And that's not really my job for, at least that's not the goal of the more educational part of the show, is to tell you all about the distilling process and everything. Like, all I know is that it comes out of Texas, it comes out of Houston, and that you can get it for about $20, and it's definitely worth your buy. And that's going to be the goal of the opening segment and closing segment of the show. Are these spirits and beers worth your purchase? Because, like, it's crazy. The first time you go into a liquor store, there's a million different bottles of liquor, and you don't know what you're supposed to pick. Like, oh, I think I like this, and then you wind up spending a bunch of money on something that really isn't worth it. Granted, I don't want to toe the line between doing that and then being like a wine snob. It's not really my thing. I don't want to be a jackass about it. I just want to give the uninformed drinker just something to drink besides that. Well, I'll be switching out between spirits and beer, between the two. So for all of these, all my Texas listeners, there's other beer out there besides Shiner and Budweiser. There's a lot of others, and some of them are actually pretty good and cheaper, much cheaper. Shiner is expensive for what it is. We'll talk about that in another episode. Well, thank you for tuning in to the Whisky Dan radio show. Hopefully everybody learned a little something today. If you have a topic for future shows or would like to be a guest on our show, you could shoot us an email at whiskeydanradio@gmail.com. Again, that is whiskeydanradio@gmail.com. You could send us in there. This will be available on SoundCloud and also as well on YouTube. Links will be in the descriptions for whatever feed you're listening to. Hopefully you'll tune in next time to the Whisky Dan radio show, and we hope to have you along.